My dad said, be more understanding, after canceling my student loan cosign for my sister's third wedding deposit. So I vanished that night and joined the military years later. They finally realized what they lost. Hey, Reddit. My dad refused to cosign my nursing school loans because my sister needed money for her third wedding. So I left that same night and joined the army. What followed changed everything. Here's the full story. I'm Ryan, 23, at the time this went down. Been working 2 jobs trying to finish my nursing degree, doubles at the hospital as a CNA, and weekends at the hardware store. The CNA shifts were brutal. 12-hour rotations dealing with everything from changing bedpans to helping nurses start IVs. I'd come home smelling like hospital disinfectant and patient care, too exhausted to do anything except study for a few hours before passing out. Weekends meant the hardware store, 8-hour shifts cutting keys, mixing custom paint colors, helping contractors find obscure plumbing parts. My manager was this old guy named Bill who'd worked there for 30 years. He knew I was grinding towards something bigger and would let me study during slow periods. Good guy, paid minimum wage but gave me consistent hours, which was all I could ask for. I'd been saving every penny for 8 months straight. My budget was military-level strict $70 a week for food, mostly rice, beans, and whatever was on sale. No restaurants, no takeout, no treats. Every dollar that wasn't rent or absolute necessities went straight into my school fund. By the time August rolled around, I had almost $4,000 saved. Not enough to cover a semester, but enough to show I was serious. Enough to prove I'd make those loan payments without defaulting, had my entire life mapped out. Clinical placements lined up at 3 different facilities. Graduation timeline set for May. Job applications ready to go for when I'd earned my RN license. Everything prepared, organized, ready to execute. Then my dad dropped the bomb that destroyed it all. We were standing in the kitchen on a Thursday evening. I was holding the unsigned loan papers and shaking hands. My parents had agreed weeks ago to cosign. The semester started in 14 days. Without those papers signed, I couldn't register. Without registration, I'd lose my clinical placement in the nursing program. Your sister needs us more right now, Dad said, not even looking up from his newspaper. That particular expression settled over his face, the one that meant the discussion was over before it began. Mom was folding dish towels with methodical precision. Ashley's been planning this for months. The venue requires a $35,000 deposit by Friday or they lose everything. 35 grand. For a wedding venue. For her third wedding. I kept my voice level. I've been planning this degree for 4 years. The semester starts in 2 weeks. If I don't register now, I lose my clinical placement entirely. Brandon, be reasonable, Dad said, finally setting down the newspaper. Ashley's already been through 2 divorces. She deserves happiness. You're young. You can always go back to school. I was 23. Ashley was 31. This would be husband number 3. And I'd met the guy exactly once at a family barbecue where he'd spent most of the evening checking his phone and complaining about the food. Let me give you some context about Ashley. First wedding was when she was 22, right out of college. Kyle was her high school sweetheart. They dated on and off for years, got engaged after graduation, had this massive 200-person wedding that my parents dropped $20,000 on. Marriage lasted 9 months before Kyle caught her sleeping with his best friend divorce number 1. My parents blamed Kyle for being emotionally unavailable. Never mind the infidelity part. Second wedding happened when Ashley was 26. Brett was this corporate finance guy she'd met at a bar. They dated for 4 months, got engaged after a weekend trip to Vegas, and planned another expensive wedding in less than a year. My parents kicked in another $15,000 because Ashley deserves to be happy. That marriage lasted 14 months. Brett turned out to have some serious issues with anger management and substance use. One night, the cops showed up because neighbors heard screaming and things breaking. Ashley moved back home for 6 months after that one, crying every day about how love was cursed for her. During that time, I was taking prerequisite courses and working full-time as a CNA. Ashley didn't work. Just laid around the house, online shopping with credit cards Mom and Dad were paying off, complaining about how hard her life was. Meanwhile, I was pulling doubles at the hospital and coming home to find her in my room, borrowing my stuff without asking. When I'd complained to my parents about the double standard, Dad would get this look on his face, the one that said I was being difficult, the one that meant my concerns didn't matter because Ashley was going through something. Now at 31, she'd met Trevor at some friend's party. They'd been dating for 7 months. I'd met him once at that barbecue. Dude spent the whole time bragging about his gym routine and checking out other women when Ashley wasn't looking. When I'd tried to warn her that he seemed sketchy, she'd told me I was being negative and jealous of her happiness. and my parents were about to drop 35 grand on wedding number 3. I've been working doubles at the hospital and weekends at the hardware store for 8 months, I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I just need someone to co-sign. I'll make every payment myself. I've got the budget worked out down to the dollar. We already promised Ashley, Mom said softly, which somehow made it worse than if she'd yelled, "She's counting on us. The caterer alone needs $12,000 up front." That's when Dad delivered his lecture about understanding and family priorities, about how Ashley had been through so much heartbreak and deserved this chance at happiness, about how I was young and had plenty of time, about how family comes first, and sometimes we have to sacrifice for the people we love. And something inside me that had been bending for years finally snapped clean through. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. I just looked at both of them and said, "You're right, Dad. Family first." Then I went upstairs and started packing. Here's what they didn't know. I'd been paying rent to live in that house. For 6 months, I'd been giving Dad checks as contributions to household expenses. $800 a month to live in my childhood bedroom while working 80-hour weeks and taking classes. They'd framed it as me, finally contributing like an adult. I'd accepted it because I thought we were family working together. Turned out I was just another bill payer funding their lifestyle while they prioritized Ashley's third shot at matrimonial bliss. I packed everything that mattered into my 2004 Honda Civic clothes, laptop, textbooks, the few personal items I actually cared about. Took about 2 hours to realize how little I actually owned that mattered. Most of the furniture in my room wasn't even mine. It was stuff from storage that my parents had moved in over the years. The books were mine. The laptop I'd saved for 3 months to buy. My uniforms from the hospital and hardware store. Some photos from high school with Derek and other friends. That was basically it. 23 years of life fit into a sedan with room to spare. I found an old shoebox under my bed full of report cards and awards from school straight A's through most of high school. Honor roll every semester. Academic achievement certificates. A letter from my guidance counselor nominating me for a scholarship I'd won junior year. Evidence that I'd always been responsible, always worked hard, always done everything right. None of it had mattered enough for my parents to choose me over Ashley's third wedding. I left the shoebox on my desk. Didn't need those reminders anymore. Didn't need validation from a system that had taught me my worth was negotiable based on my sister's current crisis. When I finished packing around 11 p.m., I did one final walkthrough of my room. The walls were bare except for some old posters I'd never taken down. The desk was empty except for that shoebox. The closet was cleaned out except for winter clothes I wouldn't need. It didn't feel like my room anymore. Felt like a guest bedroom in someone else's house, which I guess was what it had been for a while now. I grabbed my keys, picked up the last box, and headed downstairs. Placed my apartment key on the kitchen table with a small metallic sound. For a second, I considered leaving a note. Something explaining why, or listing everything they'd done wrong, or just saying goodbye. But there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been ignored for the past 23 years. They knew what they'd done. They'd chosen it knowing exactly what it would cost me. A note wouldn't change that. My phone buzzed twice on the drive to Derek's place, Dad calling. Probably just noticing I'd cleared out my room. I let it ring. The second call came from Mom's cell. That one hurt worse, but I still didn't answer. They'd made their choice. Now I was making mine. Derek answered his door in sweatpants and a worn t-shirt, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without questions. We'd been best friends since sophomore year of high school, and he'd watched my family dynamics long enough to fill in the blanks without prompting. "How long do you need?" he asked, helping me carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs to his apartment. "However long it takes to figure out what the heck I'm doing next." His roommate had just moved out to live with his girlfriend, leaving the second bedroom empty. We joked about me taking it someday. Neither of us expected someday to arrive at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night with all my possessions crammed into a Honda Civic. The calls continued for 3 days. 17 from Dad, 23 from Mom, 9 from Ashley herself. I blocked all 3 numbers on Saturday morning and went to work at the hardware store, where I spent 8 hours cutting keys and mixing paint while pretending my entire life plan hadn't just collapsed Sunday morning. Mom showed up at Derek's apartment. I'd been awake since 5, sitting on the balcony with coffee and trying to figure out if I could defer the nursing program 1 semester without losing my slot entirely. The answer was no. I'd already checked the university website 4 times. Deferral required reapplication, and the program only accepted 30 students per year. I'd barely made the cut the first time. The knock came at 7. Derek was still asleep, so I answered. There was Mom on the doorstep with that wounded expression she'd perfected over decades of getting her way through strategic sadness. "Ryan, sweetheart, This has gone too far. I leaned against the doorframe. How'd you find me? Your father called Derek's mother. Of course he did. Can we please talk inside? No. Whatever you need to say, you can say it here. Her mouth tightened. You're being incredibly selfish. Your sister is devastated. She thinks you don't support her happiness. Ashley's 31 years old. If she can't keep a marriage together, maybe the problem isn't bad luck. That's a cruel thing to say. Is it? Kyle lasted 9 months. Brett made it to 14. Now she's marrying Trevor, who I've met once, and who couldn't tell me a single thing about her except that she's attractive. Mom flinched. People deserve second chances, third chances, however many it takes to find real love. And I don't deserve a first chance at finishing my degree? Of course you do, just not right now. Your sister needs us. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. I poured it over the balcony railing and watched it splash onto the parking lot 2 stories below. Tell Dad thanks for the lesson in family priorities. I'll remember it when you're old and deciding which nursing home has the best reviews. I went back inside and locked the door. Mom knocked for another 5 minutes before giving up. That afternoon, I called the university financial aid office, explained my situation without the family drama, and asked about options. The woman on the phone was sympathetic but useless. Private loans without a cosigner carried interest rates that would have me paying them off into my 40s. Scholarships for my year level had been distributed months ago. The only real option was waiting until next year and hoping I got accepted again. Or, she added, almost as an afterthought, you could look into the military programs. They have nursing scholarships with service commitments afterward. It's not for everyone, but the benefits are solid. I thanked her and hung up, then spent the next 4 hours researching Army and Navy nursing programs. By midnight, I'd filled out preliminary applications for both. Derek found me asleep at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning, laptop still open to a page about military nursing corps requirements. You serious about this? He asked, squinting at the screen. I'm serious about finishing school. This is the only way I can do it without my parents. Your dad's going to lose his mind. My dad made his choice, I'm making mine. The Army recruiter called back within 48 hours. Staff Sergeant Williams was 40-something, efficient, and refreshingly straightforward. Yes, they had nursing scholarships. Yes, I qualified based on my grades and current credits. Yes, there was a service commitment, 4 years active duty after graduation. No, it wasn't as simple as signing papers and collecting money. There was physical training to pass, medical screening, security clearance. But if I was serious and willing to put in the work, they could make it happen. I was serious. Within 2 weeks, I'd completed initial paperwork and screening. The scholarship would cover tuition, fees, and a monthly stipend. In exchange, I'd serve as an Army nurse. For 4 years after graduation, I'd attend officer candidate school, get commissioned as a second lieutenant, and enter active duty. It was everything I needed and nothing I'd planned. But plans change when your family shows you exactly where you rank in their priorities. I didn't tell my parents. Figured they'd find out eventually. Registration for fall semester came and went. I wasn't on the roster. My clinical placement went to an alternate. The nursing program continued without me, and my parents probably assumed I'd given up or was working minimum wage jobs somewhere, bitter and broken. 3 months later, I shipped out for basic training. Basic was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Fort Jackson in South Carolina during the summer. Heat that melted your brain, humidity that made every breath feel like drowning, drill sergeants who seemed personally offended by your existence. The bus ride from reception to the actual training battalion was silent. 40 recruits, most of us barely out of our teens, sitting in rigid silence while drill sergeants prowled the aisle looking for someone to make an example of. I kept my eyes forward, mouth shut, and tried not to draw attention. First morning at Fort Jackson started at 4:30 a.m. Drill Sergeant Keller kicked open our barracks door and started screaming before most of us were even conscious. Get your nasty bodies out of those racks and get outside for formation. You've got 90 seconds. Move, move, move. I'd been working 2 jobs for 8 months, so I was in decent shape. But military fitness is different. Running 5 miles before sunrise in South Carolina, humidity. Push-ups until your arms gave out, and then doing 50 more just to prove you could. Obstacle courses that seemed designed by people who genuinely hated the human body and wanted to test its breaking point. They'd break you down systematically. Everything you did was wrong. Your bed wasn't made correctly. Your boots weren't shined right. Your uniform had a thread out of place. The drill sergeants found fault with everything because the point wasn't perfection. It was learning to function under constant stress and criticism. One guy in my platoon, this kid from Wisconsin named Patterson, couldn't handle it. Started crying during our 3rd day of PT. The drill sergeant smelled weakness immediately. They descended on him like sharks on blood, making him do burpees until he threw up, then making him do more. Patterson quit that afternoon, walked into the company office and said he wanted out. They processed him within 48 hours. Just gone, like he'd never been there. The drill sergeants used him as an example for the rest of us. This is what happens when you can't hack it. Anyone else want to quit? No? Then you better start acting like soldiers. The physical stuff was hard. The mental game was harder. Drill sergeants breaking you down, testing your limits, seeing who would crack under pressure. They'd get in your face screaming at volume levels that seemed physically impossible, while you stood at attention unable to react. Drill Sergeant Martinez was the worst woman, stood maybe 5'3", but had a voice that could strip paint. She'd find your weakness and exploit it mercilessly. If you were homesick, she'd mock your family. If you struggled with runs, she'd make you lead PT. If you showed any emotion whatsoever, she'd use it against you until you learned to bury everything deep where nobody could see it. I never considered quitting. Not once. Not when my feet were bleeding from ruck marches. Not when my hands were torn up from obstacle courses. Not when we were doing mountain climbers in the rain at midnight because someone in our platoon messed up during inspection. Every time I wanted to stop during a run, I thought about Dad's face when he told me my education could wait. Every time a drill sergeant got in my face screaming, I remembered Mom folding dish towels while explaining why Ashley's third wedding was more important than my degree. Every time I was exhausted and broken and ready to collapse, I channeled years of family dysfunction into pure determination. Anger kept me going when motivation failed. Spite became fuel. They'd written me off, assumed I'd fail, probably thought I was working minimum wage jobs somewhere being bitter and useless. Proving them wrong became my purpose. Week 4, we did the gas chamber. They marched us into this concrete building, made us put on gas masks, then released CS gas, riot control agent that burns everything it touches. Then they made us take off the masks. I'd never experienced pain like that. Eyes streaming, lungs burning, skin on fire, mucus pouring from your nose and mouth, couldn't see, couldn't breathe, every instinct screaming to run. But you had to stay calm. Recite your name and social security number, then put your mask back on correctly before you could leave. Some people panicked, ripped their masks off too early, breathed in more gas, made everything worse. I forced myself to stand still, take shallow breaths, get through the requirements, and walk out in control. Came out coughing and crying and burning, but I'd done it correctly. That became my identity in basic. The guy who never quit, never complained, just ground through whatever they threw at him with blank determination. By week 6, the drill sergeant stopped trying to break me, started using me as an example instead. Look at Hayes. He's not the fastest or the strongest, but he doesn't quit. That's what we need, mental toughness. By week 8, I'd adjusted completely. The routine became automatic. Wake up at 4:30, physical training, breakfast, classes about military history and values, drill and ceremony practice, more physical training, dinner, equipment maintenance, sleep, repeat. Days blurred together in a cycle of controlled chaos. Graduation from basic training felt surreal. 9 weeks earlier, I'd been nobody, just another recruit with a shaved head and an attitude problem. Now I was Second Lieutenant Ryan Hayes, standing at attention in dress uniform, while my drill sergeants actually showed respect. Drill Sergeant Keller pulled me aside after the ceremony. Hayes, you've got what it takes. Don't screw it up when you hit officer candidate school. They'll try to break you again, different ways. Just remember, you're tougher than you think. Yes, Drill Sergeant. And Hayes, whatever you were running from when you joined, it doesn't matter anymore. You're Army now. This is your family. This is... I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He was right. I wasn't running from my family anymore. I'd built a new one. OCS was different from basic, less physical brutality, more mental stress and leadership challenges. They were training us to be officers, which meant constant evaluation, judgment calls under pressure, and dealing with problems that had no right answers. Just situations where you had to make the best decision possible with incomplete information and live with the consequences. The first week at OCS, they threw us into the deep end 40 candidates, all of us thinking we were hot stuff because we'd survived basic training. The cadre quickly disabused us of that notion. They'd give us impossible scenarios. Your platoon is taking fire from 2 directions, you're running low on ammunition, you've got 3 wounded soldiers who need immediate evacuation, and your radio just died. What do? You've got 30 seconds. Decide. Now. No perfect answers. Just less bad options, and the ability to commit to a decision under pressure. Some candidates would freeze. Overwhelmed by the responsibility, the cadre would hammer them mercilessly. In combat, freezing gets people killed. Make a decision. Right or wrong, make it and live with it. I excelled at this. Turns out years of managing family dysfunction prepared me surprisingly well for military leadership challenges. When you grow up navigating your parents' emotional minefield, making split-second calls under pressure becomes second nature. You develop this ability to assess situations quickly, identify the least bad option, and execute without second-guessing yourself. One exercise stands out. They put me in charge of a 12-person squad for a field training exercise. Simulated patrol mission, role players acting as local civilians and insurgents, minimal guidance from the cadre. Just figure it out and accomplish the mission without getting your people killed. 3 hours in, everything went sideways. My point man triggered an IED simulation. We started taking simulated sniper fire from multiple directions, and 2 of my squad members went down with fake injuries. Meanwhile, the civilian role players were screaming in a language I didn't understand, and I couldn't tell who was actually hostile. I did what felt right. Set up a defensive perimeter, got the casualties under cover, established communication with command, and made the call to hold position, rather than push forward into what looked like a kill zone. The cadre stopped the exercise and gathered everyone for after-action review. Captain Williams, the OCS commander, looked at me. Hayes, explain your decision-making process. Sir, pushing forward would have exposed my squad to additional fire without knowing enemy positions. Holding position secured the casualties, maintained communications, and gave us time to assess the situation. Mission accomplishment isn't worth losing half your people. What if holding position meant failing the mission objective? Sir, you can retry a failed mission. You can't bring back dead soldiers. Williams nodded. That's the right answer, Lieutenant. Too many new officers think glory matters more than bringing their people home alive. Anyone can be aggressive. It takes wisdom to know when to hold. After 3 months of OCS, I was commissioned and started nursing courses through the Army Baylor program Real Nursing Education, military style. Textbook learning combined with practical training in military hospitals. Trauma care, emergency response, battlefield medicine. We weren't just learning to be nurses. We were learning to be medical officers who could function under the worst possible conditions. The program was intensive full course load, like any nursing school, plus military requirements and leadership training. We'd spend mornings in classroom lectures about pharmacology and anatomy, afternoons doing clinical rotations in actual hospitals, and evenings studying military medicine protocols. Weekends involved field exercises where we'd practice trauma care in simulated combat conditions. One instructor, Major Patricia Reeves, was a former combat nurse who'd served 3 deployments. She'd seen things that would break most people, and she wasn't interested in training nurses who'd fold under pressure. Listen up, she told us during our first trauma care class. In civilian nursing, you've got time, resources, and backup. In combat medicine, you've got chaos, limited supplies, and soldiers dying in front of you. The 4th bags run out. The morphine runs out. The gauze and bandages run out. But the casualties keep coming. You will have to make choices about who lives and who dies. That's the reality. If you can't handle it, leave now. Nobody left, but her words stayed with me. My parents didn't contact me during basic training because they didn't know where I was. I'd left Derek's apartment, changed my phone number, and essentially vanished from their lives. For 4 months, they had no idea if I was alive, dead, successful, or homeless. Let them wonder. They'd chosen their priorities. I'd chosen mine. 6 months after I left, Ashley's wedding happened. I wasn't there. Wasn't invited, wouldn't have gone if I was. I was in Texas during advanced nursing training, learning how to start IVs on mannequins and treat simulated combat injuries. From what I heard later through the family grapevine, the wedding was extravagant. Ice sculptures, live band, custom cocktails, designer everything. They'd spent over $60,000 on a single day. The marriage lasted 7 months. Trevor, the 3rd husband, turned out to have a gambling problem and a girlfriend in another state. Ashley discovered both when his bookie showed up at their apartment demanding payment, and the girlfriend called asking why he'd missed their anniversary dinner, divorce number 3. At 32 years old, I heard about it through my grandmother, who'd been quietly keeping tabs on me through Derek's mother. She was the only family member who'd supported my decision to leave, called to tell me I'd made the right choice and that my parents were finally starting to realize what they'd lost. Your father asks about you constantly, she said. Drives by Derek's old apartment sometimes, hoping to see your car. Your mother cries every Sunday. They know they messed up, honey. Good, I said. It came out colder than I intended, but I meant it. I graduated from the Army nursing program 18 months after leaving home commissioned as a 1st lieutenant. assigned to a military hospital in San Antonio. Started working in emergency care, treating everything from training injuries to combat casualties being stabilized stateside. The work was exactly what I'd wanted. Fast-paced, challenging, meaningful. I was saving lives, learning constantly, building a career on my own terms. No family drama, no guilt trips, no wondering if people valued me for myself or for what I could give them. My commanding officer was a tough-as-nails nurse practitioner named Captain Morrison. She'd served 22 years, done 3 deployments, and didn't suffer incompetence. She also recognized talent when she saw it. "You're good at this," she told me after a particularly brutal shift in emergency. "Better than most new officers I see, you've got instincts. Where'd you learn to stay calm during chaos?" "Family dynamics," I replied without thinking. She laughed. "That'll do it. 2 years into my service, my grandmother died heart attack, sudden and unexpected. She was 76, healthy until she wasn't, gone before anyone could process what was happening. I took emergency leave and flew home for the funeral. First time seeing my parents in over 2 years. The viewing was at a small funeral home in our hometown. I arrived early, wearing my service uniform because it was the only formal clothing I owned that wasn't scrubs or workout gear. The Class A uniform felt strange after months of combat utilities. Stiff, formal, heavy with the weight of everything it represented. Walked in and saw Mom standing by the casket. She looked smaller somehow, older, worn down by something I couldn't immediately identify. Her hair had more gray than I remembered, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. The confidence she'd always carried had been replaced by something fragile. She turned when she heard footsteps. Saw me. Her face crumpled like paper Ryan. Just my name, but it carried years of regret, loss, and desperate hope. "Hi, Mom." She rushed over and hugged me hard enough to hurt. I let her, standing stiff and uncomfortable while she sobbed into my shoulder. Her whole body shook with crying that seemed like it had been building for years. When she finally pulled back, she looked at my uniform with something between pride and devastating pain. "You look so grown up, so official, so much like a man." Her voice cracked. "When did you become so grown up? That's generally what happens when you join the military." The words came out harsher than I intended, or maybe exactly as harsh as I intended. Hard to tell anymore. Dad appeared from another room where he'd been talking to the funeral director. Stopped cold when he saw me standing there in uniform. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the funeral home. I could see him processing. The uniform, the rank insignia, the ribbons I'd already earned. The transformation from the kid who'd left with nothing to the officer standing in front of him. Then he walked over slowly, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. "Son, Dad, you look good. Healthy. Strong. Army tends to do that. Physical fitness is kind of a requirement." The conversation was stilted, awkward, dancing around everything we weren't saying. The elephant in the room was more like a herd of elephants, all of them trumpeting truths nobody wanted to acknowledge. Mom tried to fill the silence. "We didn't know how to reach you. We tried calling Derek's number, but it was disconnected. We asked everyone we knew if they'd seen you or heard from you. It was like you'd vanished completely." "I did vanish. That was the point." Dad flinched at that. "Ryan, I know you were angry when you left. Angry doesn't cover it, Dad. Not even close." The silence stretched. Other funeral attendees were starting to arrive. Relatives I hadn't seen in years. I didn't want to have this conversation in front of an audience. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Can we talk? After the service? Just the 3 of us? Please. Your grandmother would have wanted us to at least try." He was right about that. Grandma had spent the last few years of her life trying to bridge the gap our family had created. Calling me through Derek's mom, sending cards to Derek's address, always asking when I'd come home. She'd never judged, never took sides, just quietly hoped we'd find our way back to each other. I wanted to say no, wanted to maintain the wall I'd built, the distance that had kept me safe and focused. But Grandma would have wanted us to at least try. I owed her that much. Fine, after the service. The funeral was standard, people saying kind things, sharing memories, avoiding mentioning how the family had imploded. Ashley showed up late, eyes red from crying. She saw me and froze. "Ryan? Hey, Ashley. I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know where you were. Been busy?" She looked at my uniform. "You joined the Army?" "Nursing program. Scholarship covered everything." The implication hung between us. The scholarship I wouldn't have needed if they'd just signed papers. She had the decency to look ashamed. After the service, my parents, Ashley, and I gathered in a private room at the funeral home. The tension was thick enough to cut. Dad spoke first. "I need to say something I should have said 2 years ago. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. Choosing to fund Ashley's wedding over your education was the worst decision of my life. Mom nodded, tears streaming. We've thought about it every day since you left. Wondered where you were, if you were safe, if you'd ever forgive us. You chose a party over my future, I said flatly. A party for a marriage that lasted 7 months. Ashley winced. I know. I'm sorry. I was selfish and stupid, and I didn't realize how badly I was hurting you. You all hurt me for years. This wasn't just about the loans. Dad looked confused. What do you mean? You charged me rent to live at home while paying for Ashley's entire life? You prioritized her happiness over my basic needs constantly. The loans were just the final straw. Silence. They'd never seen it that way. In their minds, they were helping both children equally. Reality was different. What can we do? Mom asked. How can we make this right? I looked at all three of them. Part of me wanted to tell them to go pound sand. But another part, the part that had inherited Grandma's capacity for forgiveness, wanted to try. You can start by understanding you can't make this right. You can't undo the damage. But if you're serious about rebuilding, we do it slowly. No expectations, no demands, no guilt trips about family. Dad nodded. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. And Ashley, I turned to my sister, you figure your life out on your own. No more bailouts, no more wedding funds, no more rescues. You're an adult. Act like one. She nodded, crying harder. I will. I promise. We talked for another hour. Not fixing everything, but starting. Making plans to stay in touch. Setting boundaries. Acknowledging mistakes. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When I left the funeral home, Mom hugged me tight. I love you. I'm so sorry I made you doubt that. I know. Love you too. The next few years were a process my parents visited twice a year, usually coming down to Texas for a long weekend. We'd have dinner, talk carefully around old hurts, and slowly build something new. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before. That was dead and buried. This was something different, built on respect and boundaries instead of obligation and guilt. Ashley got her act together, found a job she was good at, moved into her own place, stopped jumping from relationship to relationship, looking for someone to complete her. She called occasionally, usually when she was struggling, and we'd talk. Brother to sister, adults trying to figure out life. Derek finished his own degree, got engaged, asked me to be his best man. I took leave and flew back for the wedding, which was simple and genuine, and everything Ashley's 3 weddings hadn't been. You saved my life, you know, I told him during the reception. I gave you a couch and spare room. You gave me a place to land when my family pushed me off a cliff that's bigger than furniture. 4 years after taking the oath, I completed my service commitment. The Army offered me a promotion to captain if I'd re-enlist. I thought about it seriously. I'd found purpose in military nursing, built a career I was proud of, and the benefits were excellent. But I also wanted to choose my next step freely, without obligation. So I declined the promotion, accepted an honorable discharge, and moved back home. The civilian hospital where I'd worked as a CNA hired me immediately as an experienced emergency department nurse. The pay was better than military salary, and I could live wherever I wanted. Found an apartment downtown, furnished it slowly, and started building a life that belonged entirely to me. Dad called a month after I'd settled in. Want to grab dinner? Just us. We met at a restaurant, ordered food, and talked carefully around heavy topics until dessert arrived. Then Dad set down his fork and looked at me directly. I need you to know something. The worst mistake of my life was telling you your education could wait. I think about that conversation constantly. If I could take it back, you can't, I interrupted. Neither of us can change what happened. I know, but I need you to know that I see you now. I see what you've accomplished. And I know it happened despite me, not because of me. You're a better man than I deserve to call my son. I met his eyes. I'm not better. I just made different choices. And you're here now. That counts. Does it? Can you really forgive what we did? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to keep trying to build something new. That's the best I've got. He nodded, suspiciously bright-eyed. That's more than I deserve. Thank you. 6 months later, Ashley called in a panic. She'd been offered a job in another state, genuine opportunity for advancement, but she'd need help with moving costs. Could I possibly loan her money? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. What? Ryan, I really need... You need to figure this out yourself. That's not me being cruel. That's me believing you're capable of solving your own problems. But I can't afford... Then you can't take the job or you find another way to afford it. Talk to Mom and Dad if you need help. I'm not your backup plan anymore. She was quiet for a moment. You're right. I'm sorry for asking. Don't be sorry. Just be independent. You're capable of more than anyone's ever expected from you? Prove it. She moved 2 months later, funded by her own savings and a small loan from our parents that she actually paid back on schedule. Called me from her new apartment, excited and nervous and standing on her own feet for maybe the first time. I did it, she said. No husband, no bailout, just me. I'm proud of you. That means a lot coming from you. Years passed. I made charge nurse, then nurse manager, collecting responsibilities and respect. My parents aged, grew gentler, never quite stopped apologizing in small ways. We spent holidays together, carefully building traditions that acknowledge the past without being buried by it. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.